Tariffs are here, and there are some challenges for used car dealers to work through. How do we keep our costs down and margins up during this new era of tariffs and trade wars?
Welcome to Down Payment, the podcast for used car dealers. Prepare to learn something new about the industry that keeps us moving.
Check out all our podcast content on our social media channels. We are at Down Payment Podcast on YouTube, Down Payment Podcast on Instagram, and Down Payment Pod on X. Welcome back. So in this episode, let's talk about tariffs. And we're going to talk about two sides of tariffs. One is events and expectations, economic realities that we expect to unfold as a consequence of them, and ways that you can manage as a car dealer those economic effects. Now, to start off with, we are not a political podcast. This isn't that type of podcast, but we are a problem-solving podcast for car dealers. And we're going to look at tariffs from that role. And here's what we know. The details might change from time to time on tariff rates and exactly what is covered by a tariff. But we know that the car industry is going to have to work through these. We know that there are tariffs applicable to the industry, and the immediate effect is the tariff increases the price of new car imports and imported parts. Both of these have an effect on used car dealers. Now, tariffs on assembled automobiles can cause used car prices to rise through a substitute goods effect. So instead of buying a more expensive new car, some people will substitute that with buying a used car, thereby increasing demand for used cars and, in effect, increasing prices on used cars. Also, tariffs on parts are definitely going to impact your reconditioning costs. Parts will cost more and potentially be harder to get. So, on top of all this, there's some concerns about tariffs causing recessionary pressures. And the car industry is very famously sensitive to the economic cycle. And it's something that all car dealers have to consider: the availability of capital, the availability of financing for your customers, the costs of inventory are all dramatically impacted by the economic cycle. This is one of the most sensitive industries to the economic cycle that are out there. And making a resilient dealership means that you need to be prepared for both the good times and the bad times, and what happens with both. Now, one thing to make your dealership more resilient is being really good at managing your inventory acquisition costs. Inventory acquisition cost management is crucial. And the strategy that we suggest for that for used car dealers is what we call the program car approach. So as car dealers, we really famously sell whatever used car we can get our hands on. In this industry, very few dealers differentiate themselves by specializing in a certain segment of the used car industry. Granted, you'll have the occasional store that specializes in imports or European makes only, but those are few and far between. Now, with the program car approach, we suggest a little bit of specialization. Identify, depending on the size of your dealership, the 10 or 15 models that you are most able to cost effectively buy and recondition. Instead of trying to sell everything, trying to identify your 10 or 15 most profitable units, models, is really advantageous. When you do that, your service department gets really good at working on diagnosing and cost effectively reconditioning those cars. It also allows you the opportunity to get some parts cars that are junkers. Instead of going to junkyards yourself, you can have 2 or 3 junk cars and be able to pull parts from them. That can be really advantageous, especially if they're something like a repo. That can be really advantageous. And that can reduce your reconditioning costs. One thing to be aware of is expect car parts to become more expensive, even if they're coming from the junkyard, because of that substitute goods effect. Because it's harder to get parts from overseas, it costs more because of the tariff. You're going to see people going to junkyards and that supply, demand for that supply going up and increasing prices there as well. So be proactive about it. Identify where you're most profitable and stick to those models. And that's a good opportunity to increase your dealership resilience, not only through tariffs, but the economic cycle. And with that, it's been another episode of Down Payment, the podcast for used car dealers. Check out our podcast on all our social media channels. We are at Down Payment Podcast on YouTube, Down Payment Podcast on Instagram, and Down Payment Pod on X.
Thank you for listening. Down Payment, the podcast for used car dealers, is a production of Meta Financial Services Incorporated.